So I want to take a short tactical pause here and talk about the process that we were following. They asked me to remove my tooth as a show respect to Steve Eiserman and show that this thinking is a contact sport. So you might have done something like a Cynefin assessment to determine how much complexity we had in this problem set, and then that might lead you to pick either troop leading procedures to do what you know needs to be done, or an MDMP to do a limited comparison of reasonable choices within a confined problem space, and then act on a rational utility model, or apply Army design methodology to get a fresh look at a new and interesting area. We realized that ADM is a response to the limitations of MDMP, which is a response to the limitations of TLP. And so in order to protect against blind spots from design itself as the process, we deliberately established 7 different design groups and then deliberately shared some ideas between them early in the formative stages to stimulate even more creativity. And then we invested in 15% of our students taking a critical thinking look using elements of red teaming and assumptions-based planning to ensure that the critical thinking perspective on the Army problem solving was in play, and that we could learn about ADM by doing ADM, but being critical about ADM, and that exposed us to a lot of different ideas that might be used going forward in your personal practice. So we observed that in the arc of Army design methodology that we could distinguish between the early creative divergent thinking processes and a process of exploration, thinking like entrepreneurs, where the effort was to generate a wide variety of ideas that explored the problem space so that we could ensure that we weren't missing any areas. And so we were iterative and rapid prototyping, doing quick tests or stress tests, and the goal was diversification of thought. And then there was some tipping point that emerged where it became time to get to a solution, which are the outputs of Army design methodology. So this featured some convergent thinking towards that moment when we thought we were ready to brief the CG. The CG's critical thinking is the great wall that you got to get through, because he's going to ask you the question when you're done, you want me to risk lives on this? So you have a great wall to get through, so you have to have some kind of check on thinking that says you're ready for prime time so that you don't waste that strategic asset, which is the brain and the attention of a CG. There's only 10 of them in the Army. There's 100 senators. So when you're talking to the CG, or even brigade commanders, you're engaging a strategic national asset. So that's why you've got to be professional and do professional competence and due diligence. So if the outputs of design thinking are formally current state and future state, which is the environmental frame, and the problem frame, which tells you why you can't just easily go from A to B, then the operational approach is how you have figured out how to get around, pass through, or solve that problem to get to the future state. But how do you do that? Well, along the way, there might be some forms of thinking or TTPs or models, and we were trying to explore what some of those might be. We consider things like assumptions worksheet, either using a spreadsheet or the Toolman model to develop a deeper insight into the assumptions and their quality. A task to troops process where we took a look at the end state, figured out what must be done, decisive shaping and sustaining, and then apply our assets to them, rather than starting with the assets and building towards an asset allocation and hope that worked. We started with the end in mind. And then we did some risk management by taking a look at the consequences of the assumptions we could not wish away or solve as a way to describe the cognitive risk that was going to go into the MDMP. Because once we get past the CG is going to produce vision, end state, and initial planning guidance, and then along with your continuous estimates from your staff and the reports that we're getting from the scouts and the answers to our RFIs, all that stuff goes into the hopper and gets extruded in the MDMP machine, which then becomes the order, and it is good. But you want to make sure that you're not shipping bad product. So this design thinking is really part of this production of orders that ask people to put their lives and treasure at risk. So this is serious business. So we looked at this as you push the start button on ADM and you go through assumptions and planning, and it comes out with a recommendation for action. First to the CG, and then that's going to produce recommendations for actions and orders. And so by applying assumptions-based planning and red teaming, we were doing critical thinking about that process in order to capture the cognitive risk of design so that we could be explicit about the limits of our thinking right now as we go into MDMP. So ADM doesn't stop. Risk management doesn't stop. MDMP has moments in there where we're checking our thinking to see if it's still valid based on the intel that's coming in from guys that are already out there now gathering information based on your priorities. Your priorities come out of that assumptions and risk that you were developing here. Just to highlight a few things along the way that we did to develop some critical and creative thinking techniques. We did early a farmer's market where we had people from each of the design teams visit each other and then adopt specific points of view to ask questions about the presentation, about design so far. We asked them to take a look at what did you see as blind spots or fuzziest points or aha moments of insight you could take back to your design process. Acting like a sharpshooter, say what would get the CG's attention if it was a buzzword? What are the easy tripwires or mines to avoid? What were the key assumptions that you could see so far? And if you had to execute that, what kind of clarity would you need as an operator? This structured feedback was active learning on behalf of the listener and then was rolled into the design process, which helped us further develop our group problem statement and then develop the assumptions worksheet with the Tolman model, and then the task to trip worksheet, and then the summary of those insights help populate the details of how to do design in the moment, because we're trying to figure out how to do that in the world in a practical, effective, efficient way. So we needed to be critical about it on the inside and from the outside, and that was part of the learning that we engaged in. And a lot of that's discovery learning. So it's incumbent on us in the next round to figure out what worked, what didn't work, and why, and how might you incorporate this when you leave here and either are going to be a member of a design team or leading a design team or receiving design products for MDMP, and you want to be critical and evaluative about the product they give you. As an MDMP person, did that design answer what you needed in order to conduct MDMP? So you've got to be an informed consumer, and that was the focus of what we were trying to do in design this week. Not just checklists and products, but really to be educated in the application of design thinking. Next group. Now, who's got my tooth?